Okay, next I'm going to show you how to do an empire waist. So an empire waist comes above the natural waistline. For this pattern, we are going to go by a measurement for this particular size 10 sloper that was measured at 3 inches above the natural waist. So I have a finished skirt here with the waist on it that you can see how it comes in through the waist and then flares out just slightly. It's got a self facing in it that has the darts, similar to the darts on the outside of the skirt. So I've got my, actually this is my production pattern, so I've got my seam allowances on it at a 1/2 inch. I've got my, this is the back, there's my starting point where I had my natural waist on my sloper. Here's where I've brought it up by 3 inches. And the same on the front. I'm just going to flip this around so it's the same way. So here's the front as well. So you can see how I've extended 3 inches above. And if you look, you can see that there's some shaping here. Here's the facing that gets sewn on and clean finishes off the top of the seam, and the back the same here. So on this particular one, because this pattern is being cut on the fold, our front facing gets cut on the fold. We have a dart. We're not going to cut this out. We're actually going to just sew it as is, cut it out with the dart in it and sew it up. The same with the back. The only difference is the back is going to have 2 pieces. Must interface this because it is a waist treatment. Okay, so I have traced off my front pattern here. So I'm just going to take a marker, much thicker than what you want to have, but enough that you can see. And first thing I want to do is make sure that I have my low hip line. I'm going to draw in my dart. So everything we do on the front, we're going to do on the back. So I'm going to write center front here. Okay, so I want to bring this up by 3 inches. So I'm just going to take my ruler and I'm going to line it up 3 inches, mark 3 inches above the center front line. Just going to draw that down at least that far. Now at the side, what I want to do is I want to find where my 3 inches is going to be on the corner, and then I want to level it off at my low hip, so wherever it comes out, make sure it's squared, and I want to go straight up. So I'm doing a straight line. I'm not curving it. If I curved this line, you would see by curving it up 3 inches, I'm going to continue this narrow point here. And this opening up here is actually a little bit bigger than what my actual waist is. My actual waist in the front is about 7.5 inches, where up here I need 7 3/4. So I need an extra 1/4 of an inch up at the empire. So how we're going to achieve that is through the dart, but we want to keep this line going up straight from the waistline. So next what I want to do is I actually want to take, and same thing, I'm getting my ruler lined up on my low hip line so it's running parallel, and I'm just going to extend these darts up by 3 inches straight. So just make sure everything is straight. Okay, so now I've got my dart legs up. So what I want to do first off is, because I need a 1/4 of an inch more up here to accommodate the difference in measurement as to my waist, I'm actually going to take that, and I'm going to take it, I'm actually going to change color marker so you can see the difference. So I'm going to make the depth of this dart a 1/4 of an inch less. So I'm going to take, I'm just going to measure and make sure I am at 1/8. I'm going to take 1/8 of an inch off one leg and 1/8 of an inch off the other. So now these legs are going to go back to the waist. So you can see this is the stitching line for my new dart, okay? The other little change I want to do is right here at the waist, because I want to create a little bit of a bias, and I want to make sure that my waist hugs into my waist. I'm just going to nip off roughly between a 1/16 and an 1/8 right there, and just want to find a clear spot on your side to just make sure that this is a nice smooth line. So just find your ruler here. You may need a little bit less of a curve, so just make sure that it just transitions nicely back from the waist. So I'm going to take and I'm going to mark off, going to line my ruler up at the 3-inch right on my waistline, and I'm just going to go across here and make sure that I missed that one. So we're not following the hip line anymore. We're now following the natural waist. We want to keep the curve that we have in our waist. Okay, so now take your hip curve or one of your rulers. Before I do that, I just want to make sure that I have a clear indication of where these new lines are, okay? So I'm going to true up a few things in a minute here, and that opening in that dart is definitely going to be one of them. So actually here, I missed these two, so I'm just going to go back in. Okay, so anytime you have to go over a line, if you're not quite sure, change the color, have some colored pencils or something, change the color just so that you know that you've got the right color in there. So now you can see I've got my empire. I've got extended my waist up by 3 inches. This particular pattern doesn't have a waistband on it, so it will have a facing. So facing is all going to be the same. The only difference is I don't want the facing to come to the waist. It comes to the waist, it really cuts you off. Whenever you bend over, it cuts right into your waist. So you're going to extend this waist facing here by 1 inch. So I'm just going along here, making sure that I'm making it 1 inch below my actual waist on my sloper. So I'm just gonna, you can mark in here a inch. So there, now I've got this line, so I can just take and find my curve in here. Okay, so this piece here I'm going to trace off, and this is going to be my new facing. Okay, so I have a piece of tissue here, so I've actually traced it in pencil already. So I'm just going to go and remember, every time you do change something in a pattern, whether you make a first or a second draft, whatever you do, you always go back and true up your seams. Make sure that you true your darts. So I'm going to go back in afterwards and true everything up here. This is my So I will want to have some marks so that when I am sewing this facing here, I know exactly where my darts are. So you can take, I would probably use either some tracing paper. If you decide to use an all punch, then here at the waistline, you can do an all punch, which will be about 1/8 of an inch in from the actual seam line, so that you know that when you come down and you match these up, you're actually stitching back here at 1/8 of an inch. You're going to do a notch at the top and the bottom of your dart. The other thing I would think will be helpful is if you have a notch at the side on your facings where the waist is. These pieces end up looking very similar, and it can easily be turned around so that you've actually got, you're doing this as the top when you're stitching and this is the bottom. So if you put a notch here, you're going to make sure that you match these up so you'll know that that's the bottom of your facing. Okay, so this is going to get cut on the fold. This is center front. So this is facing. And we're going to cut one on fold of the self fabric and one of interfacing. Okay, so you want to make sure that you have one of interfacing. So I've got center front, this is empire waist. Okay, so that is the front of your skirt pattern. Now to do the back, you're going to do the exact same thing. So you're going to take your pattern, and this is my top of my waist here. This is my center back. I'm going to take and I'm going to bring this up 3 inches. I'm going to square this off. I'm going to find where 3 inches is. I'm going to square it off here with my hip line. If you have a high hip line measurement instead, you can use that. Either one is fine. So I'm going to take again and squaring off on my hip line, I'm going to measure up 3 inches from each leg of the dart. So make sure you take your time and double check your markings that they are straight. Okay, so here's the extension up here. Again, my back, I need it to be 1/4 of an inch bigger up here than down here. Okay, so remember as well, this is 1/4 of your skirt. So you have, this is 1/2 of the back. So your that 1/4 of an inch is actually, as far as your measurements go, is actually going to be 1 inch bigger than your waist measurement. Okay, so same thing. We're going to take and we're going to mark in 1/8 of an inch so that I bring my dart in that little bit. I'm going to take and draw my lines. Okay, I'm also now going to take, keeping my 3 inches on my actual slope or waistline, I'm going to mark over all the way over here. So take my ruler, match everything all up. I'm leaving that dart for just a minute because what I want to do is I actually want to take and fold it. So you want to fold it and line up your marks, and then because this is the back, you can fold this towards the center back. You just want to make sure you've got it folded enough. Then take either a tracing wheel or your scissors and just make sure that you draw that line across. So this still didn't really change. There's no peak up here. It's pretty well the same. Again, in order to have my facing, I'm going to take this 1 inch lower than my waist. So this is a little bit deeper dart, so you can see that this bottom edge at the moment is kind of got a bit of a peak in the middle. That's because of the dart. So I am going to extend these dart legs down into the facing here. Same thing, we want to, this is the side, so we just want to take about a 1/16 of an inch off to create just a slight curve. Put this a little bit on the bias. What happens is when you sew this up, because it's just that little tiny bit smaller, it ends up hugging that area in your waist that you want it to hug and not gape out, and the bias kind of has a little bit of stretch. So just remember too, you want to take, and you don't want to point here, you want to have a nice smooth transition down into the side. So this is your back. You're going to do the same as you did with the front. You're going to take, I always like to use a tracing paper. So you're going to trace this all off for your facing. Remember, use your ruler, true everything up, true your side seams up once you get everything done. Back here, you can put a notch over here. Center back, if you want, you can double notch it, but not really necessary. It's pretty well straight on the grain, so you'll know that. Same thing here. I'm just tracing this out, so I'm probably not as accurate as. So I'm going to notch that there when I cut this out. So this is center back. This is the facing. So I'm going to cut 2 of the self fabric and of the interfacing. So you want to apply the interfacing to the pieces and then sew the darts, okay? So make sure you do the darts after you do. You can have a notch at the top and at the bottom of your dart as well, so that you know where they are. Mark this as Empire Waist. Once you get a bunch of patterns, you want to make sure that everything is labeled properly. So there is our Empire Waist draft and the facings for it.